Last Pint Productions presents the New Way podcast. The New Way contains adult content and is recorded in advance. The following episode was originally recorded on September 15th, 2021. Listener discretion is advised.
So you were in Vietnam, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah?
Were you in the shit?
Yeah, I was in the shit.
Last night, Darth Vader came down from planet Vulcan and told me that if I didn't take Lorraine out, that he'd melt my brain.
Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue.
We came, we saw, we kicked its ass.
Everybody wants to be naked and famous. Everybody wants to be just like me, I'm naked.
Will you help teach me about this? What is it? A new way?
Hello and welcome once again to the New Way podcast, where we break down pop culture so you do not have to. I'm your host, Matt Shank, joined by the wickedly talented Benjamin Scott Wilson.
Oh, I like that.
How does that one for you?
That's definitely, that doesn't feel right. I feel like it should be more acerbic.
It wasn't mean enough. Okay, we have to go back and try that again. Yeah, it's
almost slightly talented.
The effortlessly mediocre Benjamin Scott Wilson.
That's my life story. That's my memoir.
That's on brand. That's my memoirs. It's been a while. We've been, taking every other week or so off as we get into fall. This usually happens at the end of summer. We're a little petered out and harder to schedule and stuff. But we're gonna keep producing content for you. I still think we're gonna finish this year with more episodes than we've had any other year.
Ever did, yeah, I think so.
Which is exciting, and
I think the next one is with the entire clan. Well, I guess, yeah, not with the clan.
Not with the clan. Well, and also this is a rare throwback, old school, just a Matt and Benny duo podcast, and there's a reason for that. And I'm gonna tell you what that is when we get into our topic, because I have a beef. I have some beefs to air. I'm going to lay down some beefs about why it is just the two of us on this podcast.
All kinds of beefs.
Just
chuck roast.
Beef, a lot of all the beef.
Tenderloin.
All of it. But I have lots of fun stuff to talk about before we get into our topic. First of which is just a teaser to remind you that early next month we will be dropping one of our famous musical episodes of the podcast. And I was somewhat tickled to watch the recent trailer for the Hawkeye series and see that in the Hawkeye series, they are doing a Hamilton-esque Steve Rogers musical called Rogers, which I strongly hope we get to see more than just a fleeting glimpse of.
There's a clip towards the end of the trailer that shows full-on musical production, and I think that it's going to be. I'm hoping it's the spiritual successor to Everybody's Got AIDS from Team America.
Everyone's got Rogers. Everyone's getting Rogered. Should be the name. Yeah, I'm so excited.
But everyone is Captain America.
Yes.
You are Captain America. You are Captain America.
Yeah, I cannot wait for that. But yes, we will have a musical episode. And for the first time, none of us know what pop culture property, I guess I could say, or pop culture, we don't know. It could be a musician, it could be a director, it could be a comic, a video game, a movie, a TV series. We've opened it up that we can choose any kind of pop culture, something in the know that people are aware of, and write our own niche musical about that subject. We just don't know what it is.
So clearly I'm doing the musical version of Hellraiser 3.
I assume you're just doing the Shadow part too. And we're going to find out where that story goes, because I would be very excited for that.
I would be very excited about that. I think Alec Baldwin should come back to the role now.
Oh, Old man, old Lamont,
old Shadow.
Yes, old shadows. Some slightly sad news. Also, we heard this week that Norm Macdonald passed away after apparently living with cancer for the past 9 years. Quietly,
yeah, he pulled a Bozeman.
Yeah, I just had nobody seemed to have any idea that this was going on or that he was that sick.
Well, it's so funny. I still remember an interview with him like 5 or 6 years ago where they were talking about some parties or something that they went to in the past. He's like, so do you not like party or drink anymore? And he goes, no. And they're like, oh, well, why not? He goes, because I don't want to die. And it was this very kind of acerbic, flat type of delivery. But I mean, for all intents and purposes, I mean, he had been well into his health issues at that point.
Yeah.
Nobody really knew.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I'm an old school Norm fan, and I was very much surprised just to see the number of people really coming out, because he was a very specific voice in comedy. And we talked about it on our stand-up episode of that. You have material and you have voice, and he was one of those perfect examples of someone that was doing both of those in only the way that he could. Like you could take all of his jokes on paper and they don't work, and you could take his delivery with bad jokes and they don't work. It only is the conjunction of just his weird off-brand kind of anti-humor and that just lazy sort of that his speech pattern and everything that he had,
and also just his ability or his willingness to make things uncomfortable.
Yes.
Because he would go 10 minutes without without getting to the punchline, and that was perfectly fine. It was the journey became funnier because he would purposefully avoid the punchline.
Seeing how long he could dangle the setup out of that had nothing going to have nothing to do with the end of it, which became the joke.
I think he definitely inspired certain people like like T.J. Miller and other kind of a little bit more on the avant-garde side of comedy who do that anti-comedy thing occasionally, and they just they're like, no, that is the joke, is that it's not funny. The punchline of the joke isn't funny. It's getting there that's funny, and the fact that it takes so long to get to a bad punchline.
And then I wasted your 5 minutes to have this really cheesy, dumb joke at the end of it. But and he was a consummate talk show host, guest. And I mean, there are countless ones were being shared yesterday, multiple times on Conan where he just was and he always had the host in stitches, including the guys that don't normally laugh at shit. And I had forgotten, he was the last comic that Letterman picked when Letterman was ending his show. It was the last stand-up that he'd brought on the show. Mm-hmm. And it's a really actually kind of sort of sad to watch it now, is that it's the only time I've ever seen Norm Macdonald show major emotion. Once he gets done with his set, he does basically hey, the first time I saw a stand-up, it was David Letterman, and he chokes up and starts crying, which is not in his character or bag of tricks at all. But yeah, it's really sad. It's it is very nice though to see how many people just really, over the last week have just been sharing stories and old clips and just talking about what a great voice in comedy was. So rest in peace, Norm Macdonald. Couple of recommendations I'd like to make, and one half recommendation, half condemnation to make for you all out there. One is a show, I might have brought it up on the air before, I'm not sure. It's a show called The Other Two. It was first season was on Comedy Central. It has now moved to HBO Max. You can watch it on HBO Max. It is written by 2 ex-SNL writers. And season 1 is one of those just sneaky, funny shows that you'll especially if you're in binging, you'll watch an episode or two and then you're like, yeah, I'm going to throw another one of those on. And you're going to find some good laugh out loud moments in each of the episodes. And then I don't know what happened between getting renewed and brought over to actual cable from Comedy Central. But season 2 is it reminds me of the difference of like season 1 of Parks and Rec and when season 3, when it like hit its stride. Like it is firing on all cylinders and is some of the funniest. Like I've been laughing super out loud at bits in it in season 2. So if you're looking for a good thing, it's
awesome.
like 8 to 10 episode seasons. It's got two unknowns in the lead, but Molly Shannon plays a supporting character. Ken Marino has a really funny supporting character, but highly recommend the other two. Also highly recommend in a very different way, Reservation Dogs, which is it's
Taika
Waititi, and it's the entire production and cast are indigenous people. And it's really about the kind of the reservation life, but it's another fantastic slow burn where they're not afraid to just take these episodes they'll just focus on kind of one character who's been sort of ancillary a little bit in it, and you get an entire episode with just them, and they trust to say that you're going to not care about what you're missing from the rest of the show. And then some surprising stuff. Bill Burr showed up in an episode this week in a really good dramatic role and delivers a kind of heartbreaking monologue in it. So good to see Bill Burr continuing to branch out in interesting, strange ways on TV. But Reservation Dogs you can watch on Hulu. And it's another I will warn you, it is emotional. So just prepare yourselves that it's Taika Waititi. If you like Jojo Rabbit, it's very much the similar tone to that, but maybe less silly, I would say. The non or half recommendation is something I texted Ben about this weekend. I had read on the How Did This Get Made forum, someone had said, oh man, the How Did This Get Made crew is going to have a field day with the movie Malignant, which is James Wan's latest movie. It just came out on Friday. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, okay. And they're like, don't read about spoilers for this movie because you want to be surprised because it is that like ridiculous. And I'm like, okay, well, we'll see. And they weren't wrong. It is the most James Wan. It is so James Wan. It's like his Avatar. Like he took all of the weird, terrible things and weird, great things and just like ramped all of them up to 11 in a movie that's very much a throwback to kind of 80s creature feature.
He said that, and for what it's worth, I have not seen the movie yet, but he was trying to sort of recreate more of that 70s and early 80s vibe, especially like looking into the Argento and the very stylized, more dread-filled, less jump scare type of horror film.
And see, what's funny is I remember you saying that, and that is not the idea of like 70s and 80s, but think more creature feature slasher. There's tons of jump scares that are completely out of his bag of trick. It is very just old school. Like it, I was kind of excited because I wanted something that was more dread-filled, and it is not. The third act is one of the most batshit gore infused, just nutty. It is when the twist and you can see the twist coming, but the reveal of the twist is, I legitimately almost fell out of my seat laughing so hard. Like it is visually one of the funniest things I've ever seen in a movie that's meant to be taking itself sort of seriously, but obviously not that serious. That like this moment is so ridiculous.
As good as Sleepaway Camp?
I'm not gonna lie, that was brought up many times in comparison to this movie, actually, from some of the other reviewers. It is nuts. It is visually nuts, and I think if you want to if you get a group of people and drinks,
it got throttled both by critics and by people online.
Yeah, it is
like this movie fucking sucks.
It is unequivocally a terrible movie. Like it is some of the worst dialogue I've ever heard, and the plot makes no sense and holds up to no scrutiny. But this twist, when it happens, is you will be, I'm telling you, you're going to thank me, but you need to be in the right,
for the twist.
Yeah. Don't watch it by yourself like I did. You need to be in a group. You need to have some drinks or some other kind of libations and just fucking settle down for a crazy movie. So that's my weird recommendation of Malignant.
Well, I've got a few things to throw. First off, of a short one, as far as recommendations, do not ever watch the series of Discovery of Witches, because it's fucking awful and more about the subjugation of women in the vein of Twilight. So just stay away from that. My wife says that the books are actually great and that the TV show just fucks it all up. So
I had never even heard of it before you texted me about it.
I know. Well, I mean, I had never heard of it either. And I was like, well, Matthew Good's in it. It's got to be okay, or if not good.
God,
I did it.
Oh, I did it. You really did.
Oops, I did it again. But no, anyways, it's not good. Don't go see that. But
thanks.
We are now on the precipice of a couple things. Obviously, we have our fall movies that are coming out. We've got our new Bond that's coming out. We've got Dune that's coming out soon. This is also the time where new seasons and new television shows are launching. Next week, we will see the premiere of Mike Flanagan's Midnight Mass.
Oh, shit. That's next week?
Next Friday.
Oh, I'm excited.
A week from Friday. So, yeah, that's what I will be watching that on Friday of next week.
Can I come over and watch that?
Yes, come over.
I would like to do that, please.
We'll watch like the first 2 episodes. Let's do it. But yeah, so I'm excited about that. Also, we recently saw the first trailer for The Wheel of Time, which comes out in November, I think November 9th, which those who are in the know will say it has the possibility of being the next Game of Thrones. Cast exceptionally well. Basically, so not the lead character, the one of the main female characters that was cast. I was not aware of the casting. I had not looked deep into it. I am reading the book series currently, and I am on book 4. The first season is supposed to just be the first book. There's 16 books, so I don't know how this is going to work, but they are about to wrap season 2 of filming. Wow. So they have been putting pedal to the metal on this. And Rosamund Pike, who is cast, is literally the best possible incarnation of that character, this female character. It's one of those things where it's like the casting is so perfect that you come back and you say, why the fuck didn't I think of that? Like, I mean, it literally could not be any better.
Nice.
So very, very, very optimistic about that show. And being that it's the same thing as Game of Thrones, where I had read the books that were published when the show came out, y'all got no idea what the fuck you are in store for. So
is this
it's going to be exciting.
Series complete? You said 16 books. Is it finished or is it still?
It's
ongoing?
Finished.
Okay.
It was posthumously finished by. So basically, the author wrote the first 13 books, but had a very rare condition and passed away. But the guy Scott Patterson, the guy who not Scott Patterson, the guy who had helped him basically plan out all of the last stages of the last books, and who had been there through like, oh, here's what all of the story beats are. He continued the story and wrote the last 3 books, although the last chapter was written by the original author.
Oh, nice. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. So it's a very fun series so far. I mean, it's definitely somewhere between Game of Thrones and Lord of the Rings, in that it definitely takes a lot. It's more family friendly for sure than Game of Thrones is, given that there isn't a whole lot of like sex or cursing, but there is a whole lot of backstabbing and death and a lot of kind of crazy shit that happens. So,
and is there, I don't know if this is like giving anything away or not, because I don't honestly remember from the trailer, but I assume there are fantasy elements in this, that it's not just kind of period-ish, it's more fantasy.
Yes, there's a major the world. Yes, it's very much a fantasy show. The idea is that at least kind of without getting too far into what the actual plot is that there's kind of like the Force in Star Wars. There's something called the One Power, which is kind of like the thing that connects everything and all things or whatever. And the only people who can wield the one power are these women. They're essentially kind of witches called the Aes Sedai. And the Aes Sedai are sort of charged with like keeping the balance in the world. But it's a mess. Like there's so much politics and so many factions are warring. And it's this huge, think of not Middle Earth, or think of, Westeros when it comes to the size. So there's obviously huge different families and different cities with different politics. And so nobody gets along and everything, everything along those lines. But yes, and basically the concept is that what if a guy could wield the one power, which has happened in the past before. And like when guys wield the one power, they basically take them and kill them. But it's
finally some men getting some power. I'm kind of tired of all these women power things. When are we going to get back to movies with men in power?
Yes.
So
it's a fun thing too, because the thing is like it's only these women that they're basically witches, so they can use magic, and so nobody trusts them.
It sounds like it sounds like the Bene Gesserit in Dune.
Very close to the Bene Gesserit in Dune. It's probably actually highly influenced by the Bene Gesserit in Dune. So anyways, yeah, it's a great book series. So those are two properties I'm definitely looking forward to. Obviously Wheel of Time, but definitely Midnight Mass too, just because I like everything that Mike Flanagan does. To this point, yeah, I mean
that trailer for Midnight Mass looks fantastic. So I'm on board for that.
It's according to him, it's the first time he's tackled biblical horror. So.
And a truly original story instead of building off of other stories.
Instead of being Stephen King's Little Whipping Boy.
Well, I still think it's. I love Hill House and Bly Manor, so I'm excited. Totally. Getting into our topic, because we're going to start kind of kick off our topic with a movie review, but. So Ben and I went and saw Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, 2 weeks ago? Something like that?
Like 2 weeks tomorrow.
Yeah. And we decided, it'd be really interesting to do an episode on martial arts movies. And we're like, let's get some of the group together on this one. And we were turned down summarily by Nick, Ryan, and Patrick, all of them saying, they don't know martial arts movies, so they couldn't participate in this podcast. And to that I say, my goodness, guys,
malarkey.
Come on, this is first of all, I don't know everything about it, but martial arts is in everything.
Let's extrapolate this conversation a little bit, because I think the idea was at first we were like, let's discuss martial arts movies. And then they came back, and I say they, I'm obviously sort of paraphrasing here. It's like, I don't know much about kung fu movies. I was like, we didn't say kung fu movies. We said fucking martial arts movies. And so then they were just like, yeah, I remember that one time I saw like, what was it?
It was 2 seconds before Ryan dropped the Beverly Hills Ninja joke in there as the main thing we would be talking
Patrick
about.
said Rumble in the Bronx, and Ryan went straight to Beverly Hills Ninja. And I'm just like, as far as I know, we weren't just talking about, although obviously those stylized Hong Kong kung fu karate style films definitely play a part in the development and sort of historically, the historical prevalence of martial arts films. They're really only just kind of set a bar, and pretty much now you can make any type of movie, literally any type of movie, a martial arts movie. You can have a martial arts drama. You can have a martial arts horror movie. You can have a martial arts action movie. Naturally, you can have a martial arts love story. I mean,
that's marital arts. That's marital. It's different.
Oh, okay.
It's very similar. It's similar. But
yeah, you can do sci-fi, sci-fi martial arts.
Yeah,
I mean, it's totally across the board. You can really do any type of.
And we have talked about on this podcast many martial arts movies. I made a musical out of one of them because I consider Roadhouse to be a martial arts film.
That's just an art film.
This is art. It's an art house film as well, for sure. I mean,
and I'm not sure I consider that a martial arts movie because there's not really much martial arting. It's mostly just bruising brawler.
He talks about martial arts a lot more and does and practices his Tai Chi, but he doesn't ever actually use that.
But then he actually just all he does is swing a big fist in the 80s parts. Yeah. Finish. I mean, what the fuck was that?
I forgot which of these ones I loaded up because we were going to record this episode a week ago, so I have forgotten that I had actually filled out a soundboard of like all kinds of weird and just like a random video game and martial arts sounds and
there's chosen one.
yeah. We're gonna get into that for sure in a second. But first, I do want to do kind of our quick little review of Shang-Chi, which I thought was great. And it felt very much, listen, everything in Marvel is always going to feel consistent with Marvel. That's part of what they've built kind of their machine on. But I will definitely say it is the most to kind of tiptoe outside of those boundaries and feel very fresh and different, especially with the culture that it is examining and showcasing, including small. I liked a lot of the small touches in it. There's a great scene toward the beginning where he goes to his friend's house for breakfast, and it is all character beats. There's nothing happening in that scene that is really driving plot for much of it.
It's there to establish who everybody is, and why they're there,
and just also kind of just give you a glimpse into that culture and what and what that culture is, especially her versus him and kind of their upbringing as you're going to learn more about his past throughout the rest of the movie. But there were a lot of things that I was really impressed with, and I know Ben and I talked about it briefly as we were leaving the theater. I think the creature design in this movie is some of the best creature design I've seen in any movie at all. It's phenomenal.
It was very cool, and it looked different than anything else in the Marvel universe, which is kind of what set it apart. But yeah, there was some great. The more I mean, let's not, I'm not going to kind of gloss over the fact. I mean, the last act does involve pretty much a giant fight between two dragon creatures, and which don't exactly look photorealistic, and it gets a little bit, it gets a little insane and gets a little overindulgent, as Marvel is wont to do. But the more naturalistic creature design, especially of this kind of forbidden, hidden world that they visit at one point, is just really, really well done. Yeah. I thought it was pretty exceptional. Just the kind of the more muted characteristics of the.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the two things that really stood out to me, I guess maybe three things, but the first for the creatures, and then I think the choreography on the fighting is very beautiful. There's really no other word for it. There's a lot of moments that are very dance oriented and kind of telling a story as you're watching these fights.
Yeah, absolutely is. I mean, the thing is it's a really good mix as far as the choreography is concerned. It's a really good mix of that kind of dancey, very beautiful feeling kind of, choreography. The other thing that I think more than any other Marvel movie is that impacts hit. Like you feel impacts, like people move when they hit each other. And although I'm still like, I don't see any sort of like physical repercussions of this fighting, which is, I mean, let's face it, that's kind of a staple of the genre. You don't, unless you're getting to something like Old Boy, where you see somebody get the shit beat out of them. It's like, yeah, they just got their ass kicked, but then it's like, oh, I'm fine. No bruises,
just a couple Tylenol, they'll be fine.
But yeah, it was very similar because I felt like the fight choreography element was very similar to like if you mix something like Crouching Tiger with something like The Raid, because in The Raid you feel impact, you really feel the violence, and I thought that they did a good job with the choreography of actually making sure that no matter what, you felt the impact of every single kick and swing and flip and everything along those lines. They did a really good job, and that's also not only because of choreography, but also just sound design and just doing a really good job with staging and making sure that people understand that you got when you get hit, you're gonna move. You got to move backwards a little bit.
Well, and that bus fight is just a phenomenally well put together scene. Like there's so many moving pieces to it, and you're never unaware of exactly where they're in this bus that's got kind of a middle section that's splitting apart, and like you know where everyone is and everything's going. They do a great job with the humor in that scene, and also using that to kind of help telegraph of what's going on with the guy that's filming it, which definitely cracked me up quite a bit. But yeah, it's a super well done movie. It's well worth your time. I love the idea that this guy is going to be a huge part of the next phase of Marvel.
I think it's funny that the guy who was filming it was the promoter dude from Crashing.
Yeah. Well, and he's also he's in Spider-Man Homecoming.
Right.
He's they're like, "Hey, do you flip Spider-Man?" Like whatever the
right.
But yeah, it's and I think I mean, I've been watching a lot of the interviews with Simu Liu, and he's just seems their casting was so great with him because he's so excited about this and for it and behind it, and just kind of like I love when Marvel finds these guys that are, and really, I mean, the original for me, the OG has got to be Hugh Jackman. I think is somebody that you look at as really kind of starting that trend of like a cheerleader for these things where they care about the character as much as the fans do, and they want it to do well and be good. So I'm super excited to see how this continues to go, despite the fact that he has definitely angered China in a way that he absolutely should, and they're not going to allow the movie to open there, which is going to be interesting. Someone actually posted a TikTok about it, saying like it's interesting to see what Marvel's going to do with him, because if he is part of whatever the next iteration of the Avengers is, that's a huge part of their box office. And if China continues to say we're not going to put movies on with this actor, I'm very curious to see which side of that battle Disney and Marvel come down on, because that's a tough one.
The movie has done really well.
Absolutely,
it did really well in repeat business. It's probably one of the best performing films that's happened since the pandemic. It is the best performing films that's come out since the pandemic, especially with the second weekend returns. So that means one thing, that people who are seeing it are telling other people to go see it, which is great. And the other thing is it means, there's less reliance on foreign markets and things along those lines in order to make that bucket back. So
now
hopefully.
We'll see where that goes. I'm very curious. It's something I'm watching with great interest of, because Disney does not like to budge on these fights. And I mean, Disney and Amazon went to it, and they just basically broke ties and lost money for both companies. Like, they don't back down on a lot of stuff. So I am curious to see how this plays out. But yes, so our topic is martial arts movies, and Ben kind of mentioned it earlier, but really talking about, and we'll go through some of the history and kind of get through that. But martial arts is influence all over the place, and that's what was so funny when we were kind of turned down for guests on the show, is that martial arts is in comics. You look at Batman and Daredevil; they are trained in the martial arts. You look at John Wick. Ninjas. John Wick is martial arts. It's fucking Star Wars. You've got Darth Maul wielding a bow staff. Rogue One. You've got Donnie Yen. Like it's so prevalent in our culture. So I was kind of curious for you, Ben. Like, what would you say your introduction to kind of the term or the idea of martial arts was?
I would say, I mean, obviously, like a lot of the movies that you mentioned were movies like the big movies that you're exposed to, like the Star Wars, and I mean that obviously there's certain little types of martial arts influences in a bunch of movies, but really there was a couple of movies that came out in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s, specifically Only the Strong and Sidekicks. With Jonathan Brandis.
I knew that was going to come up.
Well, no, but I mean, I was a kid at the time. I remember I'm 5 years younger than you. And so I was right in the target demo. I was probably a little young for Only the Strong, but for those who don't know, Only the Strong is a teacher about a Brazilian guy who, oh man, what's the name of the martial art? I forget. I want to call it capoeira, but that's a drink.
It is very close to that, but I don't remember it. It's capoeira. It's something like that.
Yes, but Capoeira is the drink. It's something very close to that. But anyways, he has a martial arts kind of dance fighting style, and he teaches a bunch of underserved youths that in order for them to find themselves, and then he ends up going and winning a tournament. It was just a feel good story. It was a kind of a shitty movie. Same thing, obviously, Sidekicks, pretty shitty movie. But I was in the Target demo at the time. Everybody loved those movies. And I'd say the thing that started that was Karate Kid. So Karate Kid was definitely the first thing probably I ever saw that got me into martial arts.
Sure.
I did go through a phase then in the 90s where I would rent older like Bruce Lee movies, like Enter the Dragon. Basically I was Enter the Dragon, Revenge of the Dragon, a lot of the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s Bruce Lee movies. And then, of course, that kind of went to the later, a lot of the later stuff as well.
Which, and I was reading, like, I didn't know, like, they say that Enter the Dragon still today is the most successful martial arts movie ever made. If you're talking about pure martial arts film, and that's when I want to have some fun with this as we get through some of these, because there were some movies that were on like you can go on like Wikipedia to find lists of films in genres, and there were martial arts movies listed on there. And there were some movies on the list that I thought were highly suspect, and then there were glaring, in my opinion, omissions from it.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, because here's the thing. If you go Google what are the best martial arts movies of all time, it's really interesting because there are films like Once Upon a Time in China, like the Hark Sui films that are absolutely martial arts films. And it's like, okay, yeah, clearly these are like masterpieces of martial arts films. And there was one that listed like 4 John Woo films. And I was like, John Woo was not a martial arts director. He was an action director. He was a gunfight director. Like he was, and I would even argue that like Jackie Chan absolutely was in a bunch of martial arts movies, but like one of his top rated martial arts movies was Police Story. That's not a martial arts movie. That's an action movie.
And obviously his best movie was Who Am I? A cinematic masterpiece that we watched on loop in college.
Anyways, I would just say that, like, not to disparage, like I said, some of Jackie Chan's films are absolutely, martial arts films. Super Cop is a martial arts film. Rumble in the Bronx, martial arts film. Like going all the way back to Legend of Drunken Master and its sequels and everything along those lines. A lot of the movies that Jackie Chan was in, even though the irony of that whole thing is Jackie Chan isn't really a martial artist. Jackie Chan's more of a dancer and stuntman.
He's a stuntman. He's absolutely yeah. You're right. Dancer or stuntman makes sense to say.
They would just because he was great with choreography.
Yeah,
and that's essentially what made him what he was. Is that he could do all of his own stunts because he was incredibly agile. He was incredibly fast. Just had unreal athleticism. And so it's basically they could say, do this, and he would be able to do it. But he was never actually really a trained martial artist.
Yeah.
Not in the same way that Jet Li was or that Bruce Lee was. Jet Li being the star of Once Upon a Time in China.
Yeah.
One of the stars of Once Upon a Time in China.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting. Obviously Bruce Lee really kind of gets deservedly so kind of credit for not necessarily introducing it to the East, but definitely bringing it to the West and popularizing it here. And then you see that influence, and it's really interesting to watch kind of the ebbs and flows of the genre. Because the 80s, you have the Kung Fu series, which is sort of ridiculous that you've got this like white guy that's wandering the earth in it. But then you have things like Big Trouble in Little China, which was kind of, it was really between that and Karate Kid that were kind of my introduction to, and again,
Big Trouble. And the thing is Big Trouble, it's sort of like has absolute martial arts elements, but they're all kind of in the background just because Jack Burton isn't a martial artist, So it's like, it's kind of interesting how it kind of all exists. He exists on the surface of this entire martial arts film that's happening, but then that's not really the film.
Yeah.
which is what I think is actually kind of brilliant about that movie.
Well, and that was what was kind of strange to watch, kind of how America sort of met the challenge of making martial arts movies, because you kind of see some of these things in the 80s, and then you're right, you talk about something like Sidekicks and Chuck Norris and kind of that influence.
Well, I mean, you had other martial arts stars, like you had Van Damme come out with like Bloodsport.
That's what I was Seagal, Van Damme, and Swayze sort of are like three guys in the early 90s that are making, that was sort of what America took from the martial arts, was these guys.
Right. And
that were
Swayze
mystics.
definitely the least amount there, because again, one of the things that's funny about that, like American action in the 80s, is that like you'd have these huge, like lurking guys with like slow as fuck. And like, it's all about just brute force and how hard can you hit the other guy and everything along those lines. When it was clear that like any like halfway trained martial artist could probably kick the shit out of any of these guys.
But Swayze obviously didn't learn throat ripping from an American. That came from the East. That was a martial arts technique. Do you know how hard it is to rip a throat out when you're a little guy like that? That's technique. That's not strength. That's okay. Martial arts.
You say
throat ripping time.
You say it's throat ripping time. I'm not sure I can give you Roadhouse as a martial arts film, but
what's funny is at least from my side of things, more time was spent for me learning, identify with martial arts through video games than it was necessarily with movies. And then that kind
Double
of Double Dragon, Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat. There's things, and then Mortal Kombat has a movie that comes out, not a great movie. I will not say bad things about it, lest Beth get upset with me, but it's a movie. It qualifies. It was on a screen.
You say something bad about it, and like one of the books behind me just catches on fire.
I will get a hex.
I'm in Beth's office right now. And it's the first time I've recorded back here, and I'm a little intimidated. Something is going to jump out at me. But
and I think and we start to see this popularization toward the end of the 90s, and even with something like Rush Hour, which is not a martial arts movie. It's more of a buddy comedy, but
it's got martial arts. Definitely
a lot of martial arts in it.
I mean, I think that was kind of piggybacking on the popularity, how Jackie Chan became an American star in the 90s, or became a much bigger American star, and Rush Hour was really his American vehicle. And later went on to what he was in with Owen Wilson, the
Shanghai Noon and Shanghai Nights.
Shanghai Noon. But these are, I think, definitely very much have those kind of martial arts influences, basically. And it was like, okay, and they did the same thing with Jet Li, that Jet Li was this famous martial arts artist from the East. And there was also kind of before we get into all of that, I think it's really interesting, because then there became, for a long time there was just like kind of kung fu. There was then the Hong Kong action movie, which is what sort of the John Woo thing, which I was like, John Woo made maybe one like martial arts movie or two straight up martial arts movies. Mostly he made like cop procedural dramas that were very violent, and they had very choreographed gun violence scenes. That doesn't mean it's a martial arts scene. A bunch of gun violence doesn't.
There's a lot of Dove martial arts, though. A lot of Dove choreography.
Yeah, I was just like, The Killer is not a martial arts movie, and it was like listed in the top 50 martial arts movies all the time. I was like, fuck that. It's not a martial arts movie.
I have a quiz question for you right here.
Yeah.
All right. One of these three movies is not listed as a martial arts movie, and the other two are. Okay, so I want you to tell me which of these is the not martial arts movie. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, Commando, The Matrix.
There is no right answer here. Only one of those is a martial arts movie, and it's The Matrix.
That is the one that is not on the list.
Right, of course.
The Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, I imagine because of the bow staff fight in the river, qualified. Commando, I couldn't fucking tell you what scene in that movie they felt was a fucking martial. I am at such a loss on Commando. I don't even know where to begin.
One of the NPCs karate chopped a bullet as it was going through his head. And
what in that movie? He uses a rocket launcher. This is the opposite of martial arts. But the Matrix. I understand, especially kind of as we've set up these rules a little bit, that the Matrix primarily is a science fiction movie and it is an action vehicle and these things, but martial arts is the whole middle of that movie.
Four prominent martial arts scenes.
Yes.
Four extremely prominent, highly choreographed fighting scenes that involve entirely martial arts. And I would say likely one of the most famous lines from the entire fucking movie is I know Kung Fu.
That's right. Doesn't qualify, not martial arts, but Commando.
But
maybe because that guy wears that like tiny shirt at the end. No, I don't know.
And Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, man.
Kevin Costner, martial arts star of the 90s. I couldn't fucking get over it.
Is Waterworld on there as a martial arts movie?
It's not on a list as a movie anywhere actually. It doesn't qualify.
That's so funny.
I blew my fucking mind.
I had a feeling that that's what you were going to say, but I do think it's interesting. The reason why I was bringing it up earlier is because there became this kind of sub-segmentation out of martial arts movies where I think in the 90s and especially in the 2000s, we started to get something that happened with action movies and I think The Matrix was actually a big part of it, which is that all of a sudden our action stars suddenly had to be martial artists. They just had to be badasses, which is like, and the joke was, we said like, what was the movie, the Fast and the Furious movie where they all of a sudden became fucking martial artists? It was like 4, like, oh yeah, after Tokyo Drift. Okay. So whatever. So they reboot the franchise and all of a sudden they can all fucking fight.
Yeah.
And it's like, and they're all martial artists and they're all like,
they're all trained in like different disciplens too. Like, they're not all fighting the same way.
And we're just like, when did that happen? Like, when did they? That's what they did in their spare time. They opened a dojo.
Yeah. That year off they had after they got the money from the cars, they just learned karate.
But now there is nary an action film, except for maybe something like Mad Max Fury Road, which is its own thing. But there is nary an action film where you don't have at least one character that's proficient in a fucking martial art. Just try and think of one. It's like we've become so used to seeing this as a construct of the action world that now they're synonymous with one another. And I think that that's kind of interesting. And I think that the Matrix was kind of the first step into that, because it was like, okay, obviously the Matrix was super, super, super influenced by anime.
Sure.
And I straight up think, yes, absolutely. Anime films can be martial arts, Ninja Scroll, definitely is a fucking martial arts film. But it doesn't matter that it's animated. But I do think it's really interesting because as I think in the 90s and more in the 2000s and even more in the aughts, in the 2010s, it became like, oh no, like there's to have action, you have to have martial arts, which I think is interesting. But then I think that there was a whole nother direction that martial arts films took. And I think that those were predominantly kicked off by Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, where it's just like, okay, you realize you can do something that's very, very action oriented and is definitely at its core a martial arts film, but can also be a romantic drama, can also be this other, you can tell these stories that are completely different than the revenge stories and the stuff that you had gotten used to seeing in the 70s and 80s from martial arts films, or crime stories or things along those lines. Families feuding. Go back to Seven fucking Samurai. I mean, It's all about feuding clans. It's you now realize, okay, you're opening this Pandora's box where any movie we make, we can inject a martial arts element into it. And I think that that's where it was like, okay, well, let's do historical drama. Hero, House of Flying Daggers. These are films that were very pretty and, Zhang Yimou and stuff like that were making very pretty films. And then they were just like, well, let's get some fucking great choreography and actually, cast it with people who can fight.
Well, they brought Jet Li into fucking Lethal Weapon 4. Like, and that's exactly. A series that was, and it really, that evolution is very kind of fascinating because you're basically talking about hand-to-hand combat in a lot of these action movies. So if you look at, which is why it's so funny to me that's
martial arts.
Is you look at something like you look at like Stallone and Schwarzenegger in the 80s in action films. They're predominantly using guns, and when they're fighting, they're just throwing fists. Like there's no nuance, and there's no different disciplines. Force. But and it makes sense though. Like it just from the evolution of plot and how people learn and train and stuff. Is you look at even things like the Marvel movies, and you have something like Captain America, who is not just a bruiser, and he's one of the only ones that is actually doing more hand-to-hand combat. He's not Thor, he's not Iron Man. So he is using different disciplines and different types of that's a famous thing from Civil War of Iron Man saying like tie up his legs because that's his thing. Like he's predominantly doing these kicks and these and things like that and kind of using that part of that type of fighting for it. And it makes sense for these characters who are predominantly just fighters to learn better ways to fight. And they're not all boxers. They're finding different kind of acrobatic ways to get into the fray.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that there are some films that have kind of come around a little bit more that would have traditionally been seen as sort of the bruising action film that are more martial arts heavy. A movie like Warrior, like Gavin O'Connor's Warrior, because it's a mixed martial arts, it is a mixed, ultimate fighting scenario in that. So they are using martial arts against one another. So it has the plot of, Rocky or something along those lines. It obviously doesn't have the plot of Rocky. But
in case you were going to go watch that and think you were watching Rocky, no, very different.
It's definitely much different movie than Rocky, but it's the same type of feel as a Rocky movie. And it has that kind of, honestly, like a late 70s, early 80s film feel, but it's a martial arts movie. Like I said, now they realize you can integrate it anywhere. Because that's the thing is I also think, so then what happened was, because like I said, now you have House of Flying Daggers. You've got all of these films that are just beautiful and are winning cinematography awards and stuff like that. And they've got a bunch of fighting in them, a bunch of martial arts fighting in them. I think it's what's really cool is that I think the next evolution of martial arts was there were two ways, one of which you've alluded to already, and what you're basically saying is like Captain America, John Wick. It's these other guys that it's like, that's not their primary directive, but they can fight if they have to. And they have the means to defend themselves, and they have the means to utilize sort of this palette that they have of martial artistry. Well, the other way I think it was fun is that then people started getting, I think the movie I could remember that I felt it kind of started, that was Time and Tide, the Korean film, Time and Tide, 2001. But they started taking really high concept action ideas and saying, how can we make them really violent in a martial arts way? You could take that to The Raid and The Raid 2. You could take that to Dread. Where you're basically saying, here's the start of the movie, here's the end goal of the movie, where can we put a fight in? And then they started just kind of constructing them around that, which I just think is kind of interesting because it's basically like they were taking movies like Die Hard and then they were finding ways to make them into martial arts movies. So I think that's where we live now. That's the reality we live in right now.
Well, and Die Hard is a really interesting movie to bring up in this because that's part of also what was happening in. I think you look at something like things like Die Hard and Batman changed the paradigm a bit to say like action heroes don't have to be Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and these big giant dudes. And part of the solution for that, is that these are trained people. So you look at something like the Bourne Identity, the Bourne series, and Jason Bourne is one of those characters that Matt Damon is he's not this big dude. He's not an action, especially at that time, it was not considered to be an action star, but he has these skills and these abilities in the way to fight. And that's always kind of the genius of like, that's why I really actually liked it's not a great movie, but I liked Jet Li in Lethal Weapon because I thought it was interesting to put this like small, unassuming individual against these two kind of diehard old school, cop types in there, and really just shakes it up a lot to be like, oh, this guy's gonna fuck them up, like they they outweigh him by like double. It's crazy, but that's always the interesting thing to me with a lot of like. There's martial arts that's very pretty, and then there's the idea of like what puzzles can martial arts unlock for where you say like where can I put a fight or where can I put a thing, like, and Bourne does great. I mean, Bourne in that first main scene when he's using the magazine to basically defend and fight and kill this guy is just a great example of like using your surroundings and understanding the concept of fighting versus actual just
Bourne's a really good one that's along those lines. But the other thing that was also kind of a predominant thing that popped up, I think, when the popularity of martial arts again, and I don't think it was like I say it in this way because I don't think it was like a concerted effort or like a realized thing by anybody. It was just like all of a sudden we had these movies that people liked that had martial arts in them, and then there were martial arts everywhere, and then everyone just kind of took it for granted and said, "Yeah, like that's part of these movies now." But I think one thing that was funny is when we started having comedies that were basically in the vein of Shaolin Soccer and
Kung Fu Hustle,
Kung Fu Hustle, and obviously the best of them, which is Kung Pao Enter the Fist. But even Kung Fu Panda, I mean, family films and things like that have entirely, again, very much a Karate Kid, type of feel, but something that could appeal to the whole family. And I mean, it's crazy how successful the Kung Fu Panda movies have been.
Well, and that's another one that's also very, and those movies are, especially the first Kung Fu Panda is a fucking phenomenal movie. I remember everyone was kind of
like the sequel a little bit better.
I think it's been a while since I've seen it. I'd have to watch it again, but I remember people were almost surprised that it was DreamWorks because they were like, feels like more care and love went into this. This feels more like a Pixar property.
Pixar movie, right?
And there's some great things in it that you've also, again, when they talk about all of these different disciplines, so there's all these different types of fighting in Kung Fu Panda, and that's a great thing with the animation is that you can, all the care that went into like, how does the praying mantis fight? How does the tiger fight? What are their, what kind of types of martial arts are they showing on screen and doing? And it's that there's a lot of care and love that goes into that, especially to be teaching kids kind of about these different things. And it's a good styles. It's a good tale, story in and of itself as well. But yeah, it's I agree with the comedy. I mean, I remember seeing I saw Kung Fu Hustle before I saw Shaolin Soccer. But I saw Kung Fu Hustle in the theater and I was fucking blown. Like I had no idea what I was getting into. This was like the early days of Ain't It Cool, and they were like going crazy about this movie, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go see what this thing is. And I went with my buddy Vince, and we were just like, this is the fucking coolest thing it's beautiful, it's funny as hell, it's bizarre, like it is a crazy movie. Of all the things we've talked about that I would recommend if you have not seen it is Shaolin Soccer or Kung Fu Hustle are both phenomenal.
Kung Fu Hustle has something for everybody because it's got some great like Edgar Wright-ish visual gags. It's very over the top in its style, but it's incredibly it's Stephen Chow, so it's incredibly well choreographed and it's incredibly well, like the performances are all good, both from a physical standpoint and also just from a comedy standpoint. It's just a very funny movie with a great ending.
Yeah.
Shaolin Soccer is more goofy, but if you like idiosyncratic sports comedies that involve magic kung fu moves,
a lot of weird, crazy CGI used in weird,
early
crazy
CGI.
way. Yeah, like it's purposely strange looking CGI.
Yeah, I mean, I love Shaolin Soccer, but anyways, yeah, I thought. I mean, obviously, the best of all of those movies is Kung Pao Enter the Fist. So, for those who don't know, I think we've talked about it before.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Kung Pao is just amazing. I mean, it's just brilliance. So, yeah, that would be not my recommendation. But I think that the next time that you're drunk or high and it's 11:45 at night and it's a weekend, I think that's what you should throw on.
it's also one of those movies that pops up like of people that I am befriend or that have similar sensibilities. It's one of those movies that is constantly like, I'm never surprised to find out someone that I'm hanging out with is like, oh yeah, that's one of my favorite movies. Like it is a very specific type of person. I can say most of you, if you like this podcast, you will like that movie. I can say that pretty easy.
I still remember we didn't even watch the whole thing. I forgot if we were in a hotel room or we were somewhere, but I showed my dad just like 5 minutes of that movie and he was on the floor. He was laughing so hard. I was just, because I explained the premise to him and I was just like, yeah, it's just repurposed old footage with him in it.
At some point, and I don't remember who it was, but I was when you lived at Mike's place. We were over one night. There were like a few of us over, and someone made like a reference to, probably Kevin made like a reference to it. And then someone else said they hadn't seen it, and we put it on. Like I remember we watched it. This has been like 2012 or 2011 or something. Yeah. And we put it on. I can't remember who it was that hadn't seen it, but we were immediately just like, oh no, we're watching this right now. Like you haven't seen this, we're watching it right now.
We're putting it on right now. Like where can we stream this right now? Yeah, this is happening.
Yeah.
That seems like something Kevin and I would definitely do.
It's a fantastic movie. But yeah, I mean, I think it is we made fun of it a little bit, but yes, every one of you have seen many martial arts movies in your time, whether you've acknowledged them as such or kind of their impact. But it is really interesting to see where they can go. I think John Wick has been a very big part of kind of building that up. You know, there's a lot of that a lot of the gun play in it as well,
and it's kind of a bridge between the Woo stuff and some of the other more sort of, traditional quote unquote martial arts films, and that they sort of integrated gunplay into the martial arts. It's like he's swinging around and making contact with people and then shooting them at close range, which is very kind of this newish style that then, like Fast and the Furious is trying to do stuff like that too, and can't get away with it because it's PG-13.
I'm upset with how often that movie has come up in this conversation.
I know, it happens. But hey, they turned to martial arts movies. There's no questioning whether or not they've turned to martial arts.
They turned them into something. They use them. I will still not call them martial arts movies, but they definitely incorporate martial arts.
Martial arts in space.
I think, you know what I think happened? I think that it eventually became so many bald dudes fighting that they had to give them different styles, so who was like what was happening at any moment, because most of it is just a lot of sweaty bald heads just like rubbing around with each other. That's the Fast and the Furious franchise.
There you go. Well, so some other I think notable martial arts films to mention: Scott Pilgrim versus the World, definitely a good martial arts film. A movie that's also sort of centered around each of its set pieces and each of its fights. It's done literally in the same style as a 1971 Bruce Lee movie. Bruce Lee basically used to direct a lot of the films that he appeared in the late 60s and early 70s. But where it was just like, let's plan the fights and then what is going to happen in the plot to get us between it was like reverse engineered.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of funny that the comics and ergo the movie of Scott Pilgrim is pretty much set up in the same way, where it's just like, we know what we have to get through to get to the end, what happens in between these gaps, and like what are the major story beats that happens between these gaps. So I think that Scott Pilgrim is definitely a great,
it's a good example,
a great Americanized version of a martial arts film. I brought it up earlier, but I think it's kind of interesting because there are some films like, I was going to say, so I think Daredevil, the Marvel's Daredevil on Netflix was definitely a great martial arts show, just because it featured a lot of great choreography. It was all hand-to-hand combat. It all was, it's lethal in some cases, but the idea is that it's non-lethal combat. So I thought that was worth mentioning. But one other thing I wanted to talk about was Old Boy, because Old Boy pops up on every single martial arts film list. I don't consider it a martial arts film. I consider it a
Hammer film.
I consider it a dark, like kind of. I basically kind of consider it a extremely dark comedy with one action sequence, with one kung fu action, with one martial arts action sequence. But the vast majority of that movie is not. It's just fucked up, you know.
Yes. Yeah, I would not consider, just because there is a fight scene does not mean that qualifies it as martial arts. And and basically just going to town on a hallway of people with a hammer is not nuanced martial arts. It's just a guy with a hammer.
Yeah, and it was still well choreographed. But I just think it's interesting because a lot of people compared some of the scenes in Daredevil to Old Boy, and I was like, well, Daredevil is actually a show that's based around the martial arts.
Yeah, and it's a concept of a man going against a large group of people in a small space, but the way they go about it is very different, even if it's Bruiser. Like, you look at The Punisher has similar, I mean, the Marvel TV shows, the 4 of them they did, almost every one of them had a scene or 2 scenes like that in each of their shows. And the only one that I would consider to be martial arts is Daredevil. I don't feel that the other ones are. The other ones are just big fight scenes.
Well, Iron Fist is definitely a whatever, but that's Iron Fist.
I didn't watch all of the Iron Fist. It was not for me. But
hey. You're like, what is this Iron Fist? This Iron Fist existed?
I liked he showed up in like an episode of the last season of Luke Cage, and I liked when he showed up there, but his own show not so good.
I don't think anybody liked that show. No. But the irony is that was Marvel trying its sort of first pass at television, martial arts, like straight up martial arts.
Yeah.
And it didn't work.
Well, the Hand is, and that it is interesting because you look at both Batman and Daredevil are similar in that their training comes from Eastern fighting techniques. So Batman goes and trains with Ra's al Ghul and that group, and they're doing all of this. They're doing martial arts and that kind of stuff, and that's where he learns hand-to-hand combat and how to control his body and all of that stuff. But yeah, it's all over in the.
So he learned to control his body.
Come on, man. She's hot. They taught him how to focus his mind to just because he didn't want to finish the fight too soon. So he was really a lot of breathing techniques, a lot of Margaret Thatcher naked on a cold day. Anyway,
I think about baseball.
Baseball, Ray.
I was quoting Naked Gun.
I'm gonna veer off.
How do you keep your gun from going off? I think about baseball.
Yeah, I thought it was funny. So hopefully, our gentlemen that were too afraid to listen to this podcast listen to this and realize we don't know a whole lot more than you do. But a little bit of research will kind of do it. And we skipped over tons of the beginnings of a lot of this stuff.
Yes, so the seminal martial arts we did. But that's the thing is I'm not super, even though I watched a lot of those films as a kid, just because I was to the point where I would just go through, rows of movies at the Blockbuster and take all of them and watch them all in a weekend.
Then Ben learned about kaiju, and he was like, "I don't need to see humans fighting anymore. I want to watch people in suit."
My karate, my martial arts phase was well after my kaiju phase. My kaiju phase was like that's some of my earliest memories. I was like 3 or 4 when I got into monster movies, and my dad let me watch them because they were all the U.S. versions of them were all cut down and they were all rated PG. So I got to watch whatever kaiju. I saw all the kaiju movies by the time I was 6.
My kaiju introduction was Mystery Science Theater. I don't think I ever watched any of the actual movies without the 3 gentlemen commenting on them.
Yeah, well, the especially the American cuts, because now you can go back and watch a lot of, especially the Japanese cuts of the Godzilla films specifically, and you're just like, oh, these are actually good movies because they didn't cut 30 minutes out of them and then add in American actors and then bad overdubbing.
Yes, this is very true. But I think that will wrap us up for this thrilling installment with
King Godzilla versus Kong martial arts movie.
Godzilla versus Kong.
Not a martial arts.
Not a martial arts film. I don't. Yeah, they were too much bruising. Kong doesn't have enough nuance. He needs a little bit. He needs to work. Now, that is a movie I would watch. Is fucking Kong going to train to learn martial arts so that he can actually kick Godzilla's ass next time? I'd be into that.
I think if Kong, instead of that big axe, was swinging a katana, martial arts film.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just joking. I was just in my head trying to figure out if you could do the. So if you can do a Kong training movie for sure. I think you can do that, but I don't think you can do Godzilla martial arts because his body's not like he's not built.
He's got T-Rex arms.
He's got the T-Rex arms and the stubby legs. He couldn't do any kicking moves.
Have you not seen Kung Fu Panda?
There's no, cannot.
How dare you disparage the idea that Godzilla could do some fucking sweet ass martial arts?
His body, I'm sorry, his body is just not built for it. But he needs extensions.
He's got a 5th and 6th leg though.
What's the sixth leg? What?
he's got the tail and he's got his big floppy dick.
Oh, God damn it. That's where I thought you were going with that. Okay,
sorry.
If he can use both of those, then if he's using those instead of legs, he could sort of train to do.
He can kick.
He'd kind of look like a guy on a balance beam, like just sort of swinging around around the edges of it. All right,
I don't know how we got on this.
I don't know what we. Anywho,
what do we do?
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of New Wayne. We'll be back with new episodes weekly, and we'll talk to you next time.
Cheers.
Cheers.